computer. We're recording.
Hi everyone from all over the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good noon, good evening. I'm Paulito Palmes. I'm a research scientist in Ireland. And if for those people who are following this YouTube channel, I think you've seen me in one of these episodes. But right now we are going to change the tide, and instead of the interviewer interviewing me, I'm gonna interview the host of this uh, what do you call this
Series.
YR human interest kind of stories. And without much further ado, let me introduce to you Kevin O'Brien. So
Hello.
let me start with the very basic question. Let's know more about Kevin, his background, his training, and his passion. So, Kevin, can you tell us more about yourself?
Hi everyone. My name is Kevin O'Brien, and I'm involved in the YR Foundation one of the community team. I've been in the art community for quite a long time now, but my own background specifically here is we're going to talk probably a lot about Dublin R in this interview. So I was one of the founders and the main organizers of Dublin R, the Dublin R user group, which was still going strong. It's one of the oldest R user groups in the world. Not the oldest, but very close to it. And so essentially that has sort of been a central part of my career in the art community over the past few years. Other than that, I'm a statistician, data scientist, and I live in the west of Ireland. I mostly live in the west of Ireland now, but for a long time I was sort of based between Limerick in the west of Ireland, Dublin, and also I spent a lot of time in London, and a lot of people know me from London.
Great stuff. So right now, I'd like to tell everybody that we have a good weather, which is a lucky break for us in Dublin. Um, I know Kevin, I think the first time that I attended the R session was like 8 years ago. It was the I think Women's Day. And I think it was far ahead of the time because during the time, R was already trying to make things inclusive. Like when I attended the session, it was all women presenting from, I think, from Trinity College. It was long ago, and I liked the atmosphere because it was in the pub setting. And then so after that, socialization was very, very nice. So I'm curious because I was there like 8 years ago, but I think R was way, way back then. So can you tell us more about the origin of R in Dublin?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. So the R user group really got started in early February 2009, and so what happened really is that, from my own point of view, I was starting a new career in statistics, and I really needed to learn about R properly. But I didn't feel that there was any structures there to help me support me, like, because I didn't learn it when I was in college or anything like that, and I was completely self-taught. But because I was one of the only people around who used it, it was very lonely and isolating. So that was sort of my own perspective. It was to sort of set up a sort of self-help group, a self-study group, to actually, that we can all sort of bring each other along. Back then, it actually wasn't called Dublin R. There was a few twists and turns in the creation of Dublin R as we know it, but it was actually Irish R, and it was a sort of Irish R study group, and it was essentially a Facebook group between me and a couple of people I knew who were sort of involved in that sort of stuff. Some of them were actuaries and IT people who were interested in what became known as data science. Just a sort of bit of background, though, that this was 2008, was the 2009, 2010. This was the era of the Irish economic crisis, the last big economic crisis. And this sort of overshadowed a lot of our early career, the sort of anxiety about the future, where are we going to get jobs and stuff like that. I was interested in other things as well, like Python and so on. But That wasn't really the focus of the group. There was actually already a Python group elsewhere that I later joined, but the is essentially about collective and collective effort and collaboration to get us all help going forward with our careers.
Good, good. So I would like to mention also that we organized Julia as the offshoot of R, because when I was attending the R, I whispered to to Kevin if I can present Julia language, and you are very welcoming. So after a while, we grow the Julia community also. So I would say that Julia is like is the parent of Julia is R in Dublin, because we get a lot of these insights on how to organize things from from you. So uh, I think you're very familiar with the data science theme here in Dublin, because as I can see right now, you're very involved in both the local and international scene. Like, for example, you're involved in the Julia conference. You've been involved in the Python conference also, bringing uh, international people around here, so domestic and local. And then you've been involved with ours. So I think you're the one of the best person to ask regarding how's the community, data science community in general in Dublin.
That's a good question, actually. The relationship was always very good and always very strong. This is a sort of the opposite of what's happened elsewhere. We have these language wars elsewhere in the media, but actually it was the exact opposite case in Dublin, where, and again, it was sort of following on from the general environment, the general atmosphere in the wake of the economic crisis, that we didn't have time to be arguing over like programming languages, which one was better. I think there was very much a focus on, like, people need jobs, they need to fight their way through what could have been a very bad crisis. It didn't turn out so bad. So that was a sort of where the very how should I put it, ecumenical, collegial atmosphere in Dublin came from. The relationship and the level of collaboration between all of the meetups early on was very, very good. Now, as it became bigger, there wasn't as much need for collaboration, but the relationship was always very good in Dublin. And we've all between Dublin R, Python Ireland, and a couple of other things. When we sort of went outside Dublin, we were always sort of worked in tandem. So we've jointly organised events in the west of Ireland, in Limerick. So there was always a really good relationship and sharing advice, sharing information on venues and so on. That was always part of the culture in Dublin. And again, it was sort of born out of practicalities. Later on, things changed a little bit. Meetup became a thing. Tech meetups became a very big thing in 2015. So things changed later on, but that was the origins, and a lot of those old networks are still there.
Yeah,
Interpersonal relationships. So it's going to keep the community very strong. That there's very good foundations to build on.
that's very true. I think generally the atmosphere here, not only in the language, in the programming language, but as well as generally when you go to pub, you see people from different teams fighting each other during the game, like trying to beat each other. But after the game, whoever wins, it does not matter because everybody celebrates. And I think that's the nice thing here, because at the end of the day, it's just a you can be passionate about things, but basically you respect everybody about what their passion is. So I heard, I think I noticed when the Julia conference was in London, you are very, very familiar with the London scene there also when it comes to the data science. What can you say about this?
That is an interesting thing. Essentially, I spent a lot of time in London, actually, particularly in the summers. That sort of stems from something very unusual aspect of my career. I spent a lot of time in the arts sector. I used to work for the Dublin Film Festival. I worked for the theatre festivals. I worked in an art space. I worked for a dance festival. I've done loads of extra work and acting and stuff like that. I worked in a musical rehearsal studio. I had that whole other arts career. But essentially, a lot of my colleagues in that arts career actually were over in London, in college in London, doing graphic design and film studies and all that. So essentially, I went over to London a lot because there was just sort of practical reasons. I was living in the west of Ireland in a very sleepy suburb, and I was sort of on my own quite a lot. So I'd sort of be able to go over to London for 3 or 4 weeks on end and come back if I need to, and then go over. So it's a sort of to sort of complement my life in a sleepy suburb in a small city in the west of Ireland. Go over to London, and I don't really know what I was doing there. It's essentially, it didn't really cost me a lot of money because I was sort of staying in student accommodation that was rented out during the summer. And I didn't exactly have big expenses and all that. I didn't have a strict timetable. I was working to projects that I could do when I was over there. So yeah, I went a lot of the meetups in London and the events like in the Royal Statistical Society. So I was sort of in two different worlds. I was in the arts world still, but also I was still had one foot in the tech world. I was always very interested in tech and technology. I used to work for a training company, a computer training company that would do ECDL training and stuff like that. So I was always very interested in that as well. So it's a sort of two parts to my career. So I was sort of juggling both really. So I used to go to like some Royal Statistical Society events and stuff like that. And then this is when the R meetup started in London. So the meetups in London and Dublin sort of started around the same time. I think we're slightly older, but I think they had their meetups first. We were just a Facebook group. And so about 2009, 2010, I started going along to their meetups. It was in a pub in London. I was a bit on my own there a bit, but after a while I really settled in and got to know a lot of people there. It was really great. That was every 3 months, 3 or 4 months. So I usually was able to catch about 2 or 3 a year and go along and got to know a lot of people there. I really enjoyed it actually. So I've as well as Dublin R, I've a very lot of love in my heart, big soft spot for London R, which is my sort of home from home.
Okay, so the meetup is a phenomenon. Like when I arrived here, it's really fill in the gap when you are at work, and then when you want to sometimes upgrade your skill set, socialize, and meet people from the different kind of companies also, who have, who are also in the same passion with like in a typical programming language. It was a perfect kind of after work kind of activity. So my question is that if you look at from the past to the present to the future, how do you see, and what were the early days, and then what were the changes that you've seen for across time when it comes to the activities in data science?
Okay, that's a very interesting one. In the very early days, the meetup was essentially a Facebook group. So this is before we actually started using meetup.com. And it was still very low level and very casual. So we would sort of have sort of meetups in cinemas. Actually, we would have meetups in the cafe of the Lighthouse Cinema in Dublin 7.
Wow.
And really, we're talking about 3 or 4 people on a Saturday afternoon. That's how things started. Now, what happened bit by bit was like, for example, some people were going over to London, and like we actually had meetups in London, in Elephant and Castle and places like that. So like Dublin R in a meetup in London. There you go. So but so essentially what happened is that it wasn't growing. It was growing for about 2 or 3 years, and so I was thinking about it. Are we going to continue with this, or what's going to happen? What happened then is around 2011, I went to UseR in Warwick, and I started. This is my first UseR. UseR is the big international R conference, and that year it was on in the Midlands in the UK. So I was able to go over for the week, and So what happened there is that I started to meet other R users, and they were talking about meetup.com, and they were sort of suggested I use it. I was a bit skeptical of it, to be honest with you, meetup.com, because I thought it was a dating site, to be honest with you. That's what I thought it was first. So, and I was looking at it, and it was like hiking groups. I didn't think it would work out. I didn't know if it was a good fit. But after a while, I think it was 2012, early 2012, we bit the bullet. We signed up, and we started having some of proper meetups in Dublin. It was in the Bankers Bar in Dublin, so more people started to come along. There was a lot of people from universities started to come along, but they were not really on the same page about what we were trying to do. Like, we were still very much a learner-focused meetup. Now, they were very good and very helpful, but they never really engaged with us much after that. But what happened is, after a while, we thinking we have to level up a bit. So then it became the case of starting having talks and meetings. So somebody from Trinity College arranged a room for us. So we had our very, very first proper talk in 2012, where I presented on ggplot. It was a terrifying experience, but really got a bit of momentum going. And so after that, we kept going. A lot of people volunteered talks, and we kept a very consistent pattern for a while. But what helped there actually was that Kevin Street DIT were very good at giving us rooms. So I used to be a maths and stats lecturer in the west of Ireland, and we had good contacts with DIT, Dublin Institute of Technology, which has a campus in the city centre of Dublin. And I actually went to college there, so I knew them personally, and they were very good about arranging us rooms. And so we were able to have a free venue, not a very complicated venue, but a free venue very close to the city centre. And people, when they finished work, will be able to come along and check out our talks and stuff like that, and then we all go to the pub afterwards. So this is when Dublin R really sort of settled. It really sort of matured into a conventional meetup. And DIT Kevin Street were great. The maths department, they were great, and they were sort of really able to sort of help us solidify the group, because we were able to have a room, no problem, and there was no pressure on us to pick topics that sort of suited some venues, like sort of commercial venues, they would prefer machine learning topics and so on, whereas we could do anything we liked. We had one on wildlife ecology. I love natural science type stuff, so there was a lot of freedom there to do what we want. And again, like Julia, we could do a Julia talk, because let's do it. It's interesting. Let's sort of break our boundaries.
I remember the first data Julia talk that I had was in DIT. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
so I feel like teaching again, because I was former teaching. It was a very nice room, actually.
Yeah, very simple room, but very easy to get to, and it sort of the regular pattern of events kept up at the momentum, and so we turned into a very large meetup in Dublin. This is before meetups became a thing. So between 2000 we started about 2012. So between 2012 and 2016, tech meetups there was a few tech meetups around, but they weren't huge. And, there wasn't big overlap. So we were the only data science meetup in Dublin. And what happened then in about 2016 is that all of a sudden, like, recruitment companies and commercial venues, companies sort of thinking, oh, meetup.com is great for recruitment. So we got a lot of invites, but what happened then is that a lot of new tech meetups started. So they started to proliferate around 2016 and 17. And like Dublin R kept going, but essentially fashions changed. So like machine learning Dublin came along, there was recommender systems, and so people's requirements changed. It like those other meetups sort of suited them better, which is fair enough. Like, so it's R is not everything. So the ecosystem really developed then, but that sort of presented challenges for us. Like, Uh, we didn't want to clash with other meetups. Like they were doing interesting things, and we wanted to go along. But by the same token, we weren't really. We were sort of focusing a lot on tutorial level talks that we could give ourselves. So we weren't sort of stuck for speakers so much. But uh, yeah, what? So it kept going for a good while. But then, you know, uh, things got tougher and tougher. Venues, there was less and less venues, and with more and more competition, and also, you know, speakers were the same speakers were getting invited again and again, so it just became exhausting. But we kept going for a long time. But it's sort of, you know, it's challenging now to keep meetups going, and over the last 2 or 3 years.
I pretty agree that like the feeling that I had when the meetup started, it's like a grassroots movement. Like people attend meetup because they are just passionate to learn new stuff. It's like, and people who are presenting are just the normal people. Like this is what I do with R. This is what I and people who can appreciate it very much because it's really like sharing thing. Like this is what I live for, and this is what I do, and then these are the things that I do with art. So it's like a kind of very nice experience. And lately I see it's becoming more, instead of indie, like indie or underground, it becomes more professional, and you lose that kind of taste or something like passion. But yeah, maybe it will change again. So another interesting question is that in Dublin is like the Silicon Valley in Europe. Like you will see lots of the development here, especially in data science. Like you go around pubs, people in data science are huge. Like a lot of the people here are really data scientists. So um, what do you think is what can you say about the current setup, and what can you see in the future about this data science boom?
So, for Dublin's point of view, it was always blessed by um, a very favorable conditions around in the early, let's say between 2010 and to 2015. I think there was a lot of support, the sort of the general culture of government, local business, local government. There was a culture that supported that. What happened there is that I think Dublin got the benefit of a lot of talent from Eastern Europe. There was a lot of Eastern
Mm,
Europeans always in the group. And so what happened is like it was a sort of hub for a lot of really good tech talent from Eastern Europe. I have a feeling that was to do with in 2004 places like Poland, Czech Republic, and so on. A lot of those joined the European Union, but their workers were not able to like work in Germany or France, but they were able to work in Ireland and the UK. Somebody actually who's in Python Ireland told me this, that he came over to Ireland and got a job in tech straight away. And pretty much one of the first things he was asked is, does he have any friends in Poland that he wants to bring over? And he got a little bonus because when one of them got the job, little a sort of thank you bonus. So it was sort of bit like a real conveyor belt of talent came from
mm,
Eastern Europe. So it was a lot of like Polish people involved in the local tech scene here in Ireland, and that's why Ireland and like Poland are sort of like key components of the YR Foundation. Actually, there's a sort of really good
mm,
relationship there. Like there was a lot of companies sort of set up here for like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. A lot of them are based around the Silicon Docks, which is a part of Dublin, just between the river, the River Liffey, and just east of Trinity College. And there's a big set of campuses around there. Now, people will sort of say, "Oh, this is to do with tax and the favourable tax regime that Ireland had." It wasn't. The tax is part of it, but essentially what happened is that there was a really good culture of developing tech talent in Ireland over the last 20 years, both natively and allowing people to come in. So that sort of generated a critical mass in terms of talent, not just data science talent, but all sorts of tech talent. Now, I don't know if we're the Silicon Valley of Europe, but we're definitely one of the top tier cities. We're definitely up there with the likes of London, Berlin, and Amsterdam. And the reason here is that there's such a good concentration of talent. Now, this presents its own problems as well. Like everyone sort of knows that the cost of rent is
Sadly.
really a serious. Housing is a serious issue in Dublin. My own sort of point of view on that is that the Irish government should and the Irish authorities should try and sort of get as much going on the west of Ireland, try and balance the country a bit so that there's more on the west of Ireland. So like YR and Python Ireland and Julia, we've all joined it together to have events in the west of Ireland to sort of help play our part there. With regard to the data science community as a profession, that's another interesting question. I think there was a sort of very complicated journey in terms of R and its interaction with the professions. So what happened is like 2009 to 2012, I was, from my point of view, I was a statistician, trainee statistician, mathematician, who's developing his career in that. Other people were interested in engineering, MATLAB, stuff like that, numerical programming. A couple of people were like, one was an actuarial student. Another one was actually doing, another former member of the group, or former organizer of the group, main organizer. She was doing zoology. She was studying polar bears, and she was using R in her scientific work. That was a lot of people in the Dublin scene, Dublin R scene, were actually involved in natural sciences like zoology, ecology, and stuff like that. But then in about 2012, I think this is like the data scientist is the sexiest job. The chief economist of Google came out with that. I think it was 2012, and this sort of developed the idea of data science as a career starting around 2012 to 2016. So a lot of people started to become data scientists or transition in that direction, or their job title transition in that direction. R had a very strong foothold in that space at the time. But this is when the whole idea of that profession, it sort of changed a lot. So the requirements became more specific. So I think actually around 2014, 15, this is when actually a singular description of a data scientist, if it ever existed, it was sort of redundant by then, because this was the start of the machine learning engineers, the people who are sort of really out and out statisticians, mathematicians, such as myself, data engineers. So that's when it started to fragment. This is when the question of R and Python really arose then as well. I think people misinterpreted, because I think they described their sort of particular brand of data science as the real type of data sciences. So this is at odds with our general vibe. We were very much the Dublin vibe was that we're quite a lot of distinctive career paths under one umbrella. And I think that's sort of changed now. I think, but I think a lot of people know that Python became the sort of de facto language of most data science career paths. And yeah, so there was a lot of more interest in Python and PyData starting around 2014, 15, and that we still see today. But what does the future hold as well? That's another question. Firstly, I think that combined workflows, where we have data science teams where each person on the team will sort of have a different specialization and probably be using a different language, and that like there'll be a lot of work put into sort of combined workflows. which is the type of stuff that you actually discuss with us ourselves. I think that is the where things are now, and in the future, I think things will fragment more. I think the fashions will change, and it'll become AI will become the main word now, and so we'll see how
That's
that
great.
goes. Like,
So I think one more last question, because you mentioned something about collaborations with Python and the other languages. So can you talk more about these collaborations with the other communities here in Dublin?
well, again, what happened in Dublin now over the last 2 or 3 years is Dublin specifically is that there's been less and less meetups. There's less and less venues. There's more like meetups that are essentially parts of companies. So it's tougher to get venues. We don't have a budget, so we can't do the free beer and pizza thing.
Yes.
So that's in terms of what people would sort of conventionally understand as a meetup. Something at 7 o'clock with free beer and pizza, go to a company and then hear a talk and then chat around afterwards. But in terms of the communities, there's been sort of more of a focus towards creating a pattern of conferences and sort of essentially growing up, essentially transforming from meetups to conferences. So Dublin R, Python Ireland, and of course Dublin Julia have all collaborated together to sort of get sort of events going, conference events going. We had 2 examples of that last year in Limerick in the west of Ireland, both in February. So in the first part, we had a YR Limerick mini conference that was sort of attached to a recruitment show, and that was in Tobin Festival. It sort of got the logistics of it, because we got the free venue, meant that we had sort of trouble sort of controlling attendance, no shows and stuff like that. I mean, but ultimately as a proof of concept, it was very exciting. But in the same month, on the 29th of February 2020, we had PyCon Limerick. We've actually had a few mini one-day conferences in Limerick in the Midwest of Ireland, which is accessible for most of all of the other cities in the west of Ireland, 1 or 2 hour drives. Mostly Python, but again, other programming languages were and environments were welcome to come along. That was the vibe, that we were hoping to get the OpenStreetMap people involved. I don't even know the names of them. There was Vue.js, that meetup, bring them along. There was a hardware group who do drones, get them along to do something. It's sort of, not to be siloed. In fact, really explore the connections between all of these communities, because I think that's what's going to be really interesting going forward. Just actually, for example, with the R community, all of a sudden, like a lot of people are talking about HTML, CSS, JavaScript type things, sort of when they're building their dashboards. So I think that sort of collaboration or sort of interaction between one sort of domain and the other, that's really exciting. What you can do there, get what you can build out of 2 different what would be considered 2 different distinctive branches of tech.
Okay, so before we end this session, what is your parting message to the new generations, those students who are choosing their career path as a data science?
Something actually I read on LinkedIn is something I strongly agree with. Now, so this is the point of view of developing your career as a data scientist or a data analyst. I was lucky in the respect that I was working at a university that had a strong focus on, for example, stuff like food science, sports science, equine science. Essentially, let's collectively call them the life sciences. Okay. And I got little jobs here and there, sort of like helping people with their projects. Project work, like show them how to use SPSS, stuff like that, audiology, that sort of stuff. Now, actually, to be honest with you, I was mostly using SPSS for that sort of stuff. But what helped me there a lot was building up domain knowledge. So my domain knowledge would sort of be centered towards life sciences. And so you know what's type of sort of topics that would become more important in that area. For example, in my area, like detailed knowledge of hypothesis testing and model fitting and model validation and model transparency. So I became a bit of a specialist at that, or that's one of my key specialities. I also sort of developed a greater appreciation of GIS. Now, I'm not an expert in it. I'm not an expert in QGIS or anything like that, but I would be fairly comfortable getting a map together. And so essentially domain knowledge, having a sort of fixed idea in advance about what domain you're going to work in. So because there's components of that domain that you'll know what you need to know. Now, it doesn't really matter if you're using them in R, Python, or Julia, but you will sort of, you would know that you would know you get a greater appreciation of what to focus on when you're studying R or studying in Python.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I think we will end the session now. Thank you very much, everybody, for having the time to listen to our interview.
That was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.